We're going to talk about how to make a star today. I've had a lot of questions on how to make a little bit more complex shapes than what we have available um, in the sketching tools. So let's take a look. First off, I'm going to start a new sketch. And if I take a look at a 5-point star, for example, I notice that there's essentially 5 sides. So I do have a 5-sided geometric shape I can start with, which is a polygon. And that's actually a really nice way to start, for the fact that once I select a polygon, it puts a lot of relationships and constraints in this. It's going to save me work down the road. So I always like to do um, the quickest, most efficient way I can. And for me, that is to utilize the tools I do have first. All right, so let's take a look. So I got my polygon there. Now I'm going to want to use some lines. And for this, I'm not really going to pay attention to whether my lines are straight or mid-pointed or anything like that. I just want to make sure the endpoints of my lines line up with those on the polygon. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a few lines in and start approaching the shape of a star, but it's not going to be looking good. It's going to be kind of ugly, and that's okay. One thing you'll notice is a lot of relationships or different little dotted lines pop up, and I actually want to stay away from those because I don't want extra relationships, extra constraints in my lines. Sometimes it's unavoidable to get a little bit of something, but I want to stay away from that. That's going to make it a little more work for me later. All right, so I have a star. Yes, it's ugly, but that's going to change as soon as we start putting dimensions and constraints in. Now, before I put all my constraints in, I want to start doing my dimensions. So I know that the length of each of these lines is 2.05 millimeters, so I'm going to start there. And right off the bat, I'm not getting the length of the line, which is what I want. So actually what I need to do is right-click and use the align feature. Now I have the length of that line. 2.05 millimeters, and yes, it shrunk it down because I'm on this cube is essentially 25 millimeters large. That's not going to be a problem though. The next dimension is the side of the polygon, so to speak. So I'm going to select those 2 points, and it's doing the same thing. I'm having well, that's actually the dimension I want. So perfect. And that is going to be 1.27 millimeters. And this whole thing's going to shrink, and it might get a little crazy, but that's okay. Now, some people would be kind of freaked out by this, but this is fine. This actually tells me that the lines I made, the points of the star, are actually mostly attached to the polygon. There was only one point here that didn't catch the polygon side, but I can use the coincident and change that. Now that I have a few starting dimensions in here, what I can do is, instead of putting dimensions on each of these lines, I can just use the equal constraint to make them all the same length, which if we think about a star, that is absolutely the case. So just one by one, kind of moving my way around, start putting these constraints in. Now, a lot of times we'll get to a point where it says, oh, you can't do that. There's already a constraint there. And when that happens, what you need to do is just find out what the constraint is. Sometimes it's a parallel or a perpendicular or a vertical or a horizontal that is keeping you from putting that equal relationship in. You just need to find it and get rid of it. I just usually drag over the screen, take a look at the relationships, and get rid of the ones I don't want just by deleting those. But this worked out where I didn't have any of those problems. So I have my dimensions, my 2 dimensions I need. Oh, and actually this dimension didn't work right. I thought it was point to point, but it's got an angular look there. So I'm going to go back to dimension, click point to point, and I don't want either of those. I want the straight line dimension. So I'm going to click aligned and double check what that was, 1.27. So it's actually a little bit different. So it's critical you have the right dimension style there. All right. Now that said, yes, it is still green. I need 3 dimensions. However, when I drag it around, it stays together, which tells me that my shape is good. I just need to essentially find a place on the cube where it needs to go. And you can check out the other video where I drew grid lines, or you can use dimensions to go side to side on that. So That's how you make a star in Inventor. And the real skill comes when you want to extrude multiple stars. What do you do then? Well, you can use mirrors. I generally will just uh, copy and paste. I use the Control C and Control V, and there's my next star, and I can go put that where I want. Once I can grab the center point, I can just move that where I want. Now, one thing that you will notice is sometimes the extrusion feature can get a little funny when you have the star. It's because we haven't done one thing. We have too many lines. We haven't given it an enclosed feature. So this is where we can highlight the polygon that we used and turn it into construction lines, which make it more reference lines and won't interfere with our extrusion. So let's just see what it looks like when I extrude it. Okay, so no problems picking up that extrusion. I'm going to do extrusion cut, just say 2 millimeters in, and voila. Nice looking extrusion cut. That's perfect. Now all you have to do is get them lined up correctly on the side of the cube.